It's like a Beatles day or something. I just realized, because I just posted on Facebook, Dan and I were talking in a text. I just started saying, so we're creating the suffering unconsciously. We don't know it when we have buried emotions. Then it comes into awareness and we allow it. So we create it and then allow it. Create it, allow it. Create it, allow it. And then I said, this is a text I sent to him. I said, that's exhausting. Even if we do allow it, that could go on a long time. And it's especially exhausting if we resist it. But that I'm looking into, like, is there any reason to process what arises if we can get skillfully to the root? Isn't it too late once it arises? Shouldn't we just let it be? And then I referred to how John and Paul figured that out. I wrote about that. But that feels like, and that's what a lot of the Eastern practices are about. Just something arises, do nothing, see, let it be as it is. Coming and going to awareness. After I sent that text, Beatles songs, because Dan and I are both Beatles fans, and for me, I was just like, yeah. And then here came, I'm just sitting here watching the wheels go round and round. That song in my head. And I knew it was related to that. And I just said, well, I want to go do a video because I know what I'm trying to say. Like this whole music thing and creativity and inquiry and awareness, consciousness, science, it's all one thing to me, It doesn't even feel like these things are separate. And music informs and gives insight and science does. And it's all helping us find what's unconscious within us in different ways. It's a dance. When you open up the unconscious, the whole world, your world's being created by it. So you have access to your world and how it's being created. And you're conscious to it much more. If you go deep enough, you end the suffering, which is the great thing. And my point is, can we end the suffering if we just sit here and watch it come and go? When people used to ask me that as a teacher, I would say, well, it's a good enough question, by the way, but I didn't know how to answer it. When they would say, well, when does this end? It makes me laugh now because it's a really valid question. And, some teachers will just say, I would just say in some cases, and people would say, oh, this is really clear. Thank you, Scott. I would say, well, just notice that. See how that comes and goes to what you are. That's happening to you within awareness, to awareness, something like that. Welcome the energy of that, or some sort of inquiry that didn't get to the root. But it's a really valid question. I didn't understand how valid it was back then when I had repression. Because, well, first of all, how long something takes is totally up to us, really. To the degree of skill that we have and the degree of consciousness and just earnestness to look. Because our suffering gets produced by repression. So if we're not going to the repression, we're going to still see some suffering. And maybe a lot. And so when you talk about ending it, if the suffering is being created by the trauma, then the seeking to end it is being created by the trauma, and you can verify that in your experience. And so, on one hand, what I want to say about that is the question of time is actually really relevant because it shows us how identified we are and the degree of the repression running. Because if I say, well, when will this end? That could just be seeking energy that wants to get away from the buried stuff. That informs me, though. And I don't want to just let that come and go. I mean, I want to let it come, but I want to see where the root of that is, because otherwise it can keep coming, And that's the other part that I want to talk about, which is it's a valid question, when will the suffering end? Because it's a valid question. Forget the non-dual pointing. Forget the fact that everything comes and goes in awareness, including that question. Because you can say that about everything. Everything comes and goes. The other thing is, when will the suffering fucking end? That's the other part of it. It's not just like something to point to dismiss even when we are suffering. It's a valid question. But I couldn't get to the root of it. So what was I supposed to say? Good luck with that. Just keep watching your suffering coming and going. But you are the awareness to which that comes and goes. It doesn't work. I mean, it works for a while. In the moment, it actually frees you from the question. If you really see it, it's like here's this question and this energy around it. You just let it be and it doesn't get answered. And that's so peaceful. But that's exactly what the repression wants, is that peace. That's a valid question. Don't let it just fall away. Because we need to look at it, not analytically, but we need to trace it back to its somatic roots to find that mechanism of being afraid to feel and express emotion, which creates that. The buried emotion creates it. I just miss so many opportunities just sitting there watching my suffering come and go. I mean, the seeking itself, I remember it was put to rest by watching it come and go. There were definitely some inquiries in there from time to time, but it's basically just, here's a seeking thought. Don't do anything with it. Just let it come and go. The energy with it, don't do anything with that. Let that be. And then every time that came and went, I lost an opportunity to find out that I was creating it. And especially as I would talk about it as things coming and going in awareness in a really impersonal way, I just sort of further dissociated from it. From the fact of my creating the suffering. And by the language and the pointing. It's just until you do it long enough as a teacher, you may not see it, or unless you've done this work, the bypass is built into the pointing to how things come and go to awareness, because it doesn't get to the why they keep coming and going, what's creating them. Sometimes we hit into it, but I'm talking about a mechanism. This isn't a story, it isn't a feeling, it's not just a contraction, it's not a state or experience, it's nothing like that. It's a constant creating of suffering to stay safe and get love. And that fundamentally it's our physically separate body, seemingly separate, and the sense of deficiency with it. That's the core of it. Layers of fear, of feeling and expressing this over years of just holding something back. That creates that sense of self-contraction, which is almost physical, but then there's all the emotional and other suffering that comes too. And if once we understand that we're creating it for survival, and we do not farm it out to others anymore, it doesn't mean we don't get triggered. I'm not saying that, or like we don't get angry at people. Nothing like that. We don't farm out our resource. What is it? Outsource. Damn it. Outsource. Our responsibility to uncover the repression that's creating our own suffering. Why would we want to do that? Unless we just wanted to suffer more. And that's what the operating system wants. To stay safe and get love. But so how about instead of unconsciously creating it and then it comes into awareness and we let it be, we go to the mechanism where it's unconsciously being created and then it stops arising. At some point, when you make the thing conscious that really needs to be made conscious, the stuff that we're witnessing are the visible effects of the buried emotion. So we're witnessing the products of our contraction, our physical separate body, our container of pain, our pain body, as Eckhart says. Well, I was just sitting there watching my suffering come and go, and I noticed that if you sit there and watch it from awareness long enough, a lot of it will quiet. Or if you have an awakening shift, you will see some of those visible effects, the suffering itself, quiet down. But in my view, that's the stuff that is not connected to the core of your suffering. So the stuff that people experience after that can be some deep stuff. If you don't prepare for that early and do some somatic work along the way from the beginning, all along the way, then that stuff can hit you after you recognize yourself as the awareness in which everything's happening. So I think it's a much gentler more humane and more skillful way to do it would be to be interested in the recognition of the presence here, always, and get to the root of suffering. Because you're going to be sitting here watching suffering coming and going that you're producing, but you don't realize it. Or maybe you do, but even if you understand it in your mind, you don't know it in your body. It's unconscious until it's not. If I had a little machine here that just kept spitting out trash everywhere, what would I want to do? Just sit and just allow the trash or catch the trash or clean the room up? No, turn the machine off. End the suffering. I hate to be that crude, but if you knew that you could do that, you would. Because every being that I've ever seen wants to end suffering. Because really, suffering is not something, it's okay not to want to suffer. I think my experience shows me. Because if we don't allow the suffering and get to investigate, get to the root of it through an investigation, we're not going to end it. You almost have to want to end it to even be interested. I think there might be some people out there who are not trying to truly end it, right? Maybe that was you. I thought I was trying to end it, or I wanted to end suffering. And people would say, well, who wants to end suffering? Who? That'll stop you in your tracks for a second. Who wants to end it? Well, the thing is, even if you look and see that there's nobody here who wants to end it, the suffering continues. And it can, because I've seen that. And so if you ask that question again, who wants to end it, that becomes the bypass, because that keeps you safe from actually investigating what's creating it. As the mind comes in and says, well, don't bother. Who is that? You have to be really careful with the mind thing, because the body's keeping the score. And the suffering isn't going to end until the repression is clear. I can't see another way. I tried every other way, including watching my suffering coming and going for years, and even inquiry that didn't get to the root. But it really makes you ask the question, though, do I actually want to end suffering? Have I devised ways to tell myself that I can't? Is that just part of my own deficiency and lack that comes from the repression? Like, that's just too big. I have to stay small. Or I'm powerless. I can't. Because what if you can? Not you. What if it can end because you become empty, so to speak, or you're seen as empty? Say it that way. Because what I've been doing lately is saying, almost with any inquiry or process, you almost have to pull up any unconscious programs where you're trying to use the inquiry to get somewhere, to get rid of things. But once that's made conscious, there's more settled, you're settled more into as presence, and you can really take a deeper look. The seeking really, for me, is a distraction. Like, it's not a bad thing, but I don't know how we investigate skillfully the root of suffering in the body if we're being pulled into the future thing constantly. And so I do think that we have to really set as awareness and see things coming and going, and really recognize the ground here that doesn't come and go. But as we do that, get to emotional repression work early, because that's where you can just sit and miss the root of suffering and watch it all come and go. And then I think this is why teachers are getting sick. I do. In different ways. And I think you should look at us, even if we're not talking about it publicly. You should go read the science and deduce for yourself that when humans, even if their teachers, get sick, it's probably, the science is probably, we are not an exception to the science. I don't know how that would happen. And so when we have ailments, you can pretty much bet that the cause is similar to yours. Oh, don't give us a break on that, even if we're trying to hide it. Because we're talking about ending suffering. My God, what is it if it doesn't include the chronic pain that I had for 28 years? I carried that around. Is that not suffering? I could say, well, after a while, a lot of the stories about the pain just left. And there was just the sensation, which is really painful, but not many, if any, stories. But that's just not enough because the pain is there for a reason. And I think it is good to question or allow all the stories on the top that try to protect us from finding what the reason is, which is repression quite often. I've just discovered, recently that there has to be something in us that shifts in a certain direction. Like if we're bound and determined to just be, and that's it, and let things come and go, we have to contend with the fact of why we've settled on that process, because that's still actually a process of resting and allowing things to come and go. Why did we pick that one instead of the one that gets to the stuff that creates what comes and goes? I think that should be inquired into, if you're earnest, because if you want to end suffering, because if you're choosing a way of processing or being because it's safer than actually getting to the root, well, that's not about freedom. No matter how you spin it, that's about safety and getting love, which is just repression running that. I think we have to ask ourselves really hard questions like, is my objective here to feel better with practices and just to be at peace, even if temporarily? And is that peace even sustainable in my relationships? Like, even if I do have moments of feeling better, does that go everywhere I go? Because when you get to the repression, that sense of being and fluidity and feeling good and being embodied goes everywhere you go. It's sustainable. But temporary moments of reprieve aren't. Presence is sustainable. It's the ground of it all. It's a stupid word to use in that sense. It's not sustainable. But I mean, I'm just trying to compare that to like when we process just triggers. Like, is that process sustainable with regard to ending suffering and embodying presence? I don't think so. If we stay at the surface, I think we can expect some partially embodied sort of experience where we're here now, but not really here now in relationship, including we're not really here to feel and express the stuff we've buried for sure. And so therefore we're going to be suffering still, as long as that's the case. I wish it weren't true. I tried to get around it in so many different ways. The bypassing. At some point, truth just slays you. You don't slay it. It slays you, And you just see, I have to feel what I don't want to feel. There's just no way around that. But fuck, we will fight that. I also just want to say this. I'm just kind of fading off the conversation here into the end. A few more points here. I have been saying that this work, and I think that just real transformation is energetic. That's what I want to say. It's not, I don't know, there's so much emphasis on awareness and presence that is that. But energetically, if the body's not in alignment with that, there's still suffering. So it's the embodied presence that's the only thing that seems worth pointing to. Because the initial awakening is often a landing for people, because you think you're done. Because it's like, for some people, it's almost a dissociation from the body. It's not an embodiment. The initial awakening, especially if they have trauma, or their exposure to Eastern practices and teachings, render them into a state where they can't really feel into their bodies. And the pointings are not designed to help with that, because that's trauma. You can point more to the space in which the dissociation is happening, but it doesn't help it. You have to dig to the unconscious, which is very intelligently creating that state for safety. Otherwise, we have people in, again, different states of partially embodied presence, but think that they're done because the ego always kind of wants to be done, because we want to feel better and do better and be better, and think that we're done suffering. It's just natural. But we don't really have a say in it consciously, is what I've learned. all the books I wrote didn't mean diddly squat when it came to getting spinal stenosis and nerve pain and wanting to kill myself. I'm not saying I don't endorse them. I'm just saying I don't endorse my books or any of those non-dual books, most of them, unless it's just a start to rest and allow it all. Just see your suffering coming and going. Become awake to it, and then start to investigate it, though. Don't just sit and watch it. It doesn't have to be about seeking when you process. Seeking is a program. It's a set of programs that can be seen and allowed to, made conscious. You just have to have earnestness, and I don't know what that is. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, I want to say one more thing before. Well, I know what it is, but it's hard to bottle it. I'll just say a couple things, and I want to talk about my YouTube shorts. If you want to start watching some of those, especially if you don't have the attention span for my long rants, I totally get that. Actually, I don't think I like to listen to people for long periods of time, unless it's like some new information about the government and UFOs. I like that, actually. I'll listen to that stuff. Maybe some stuff around consciousness and physics, quantum physics, but not this kind of thing. Nothing against me. No offense, Scott. Don't want to listen to you. But I've been enjoying doing these shorts. I want to talk about that. The earnestness, it just means, look, I'll say this real quick. I wasn't going to go into it. But I feel like there's something, we can't use those kinds of things as a cop-out. I think we need words to help us until we don't need them anymore. And earnestness points to someone who is at a place in their life where they're just ready and they want to listen to someone that they know that they trust, because they can't do it themselves yet, but they're willing to learn whatever skills they need to learn in whatever context they need, because they really are done with the suffering and they know it. And then there's everybody else. No offense, but there's everybody else. And, people have tried to make the point to me that everybody's earnest. It's not a judgment. I'm just saying sometimes we haven't suffered enough. I've seen it. I've watched people close to me who thought they wanted to be free, but they weren't ready. If we don't use words like that, we don't see patterns that sabotage how we sabotage ourselves. We'll gloss over things. If we keep saying, oh, earnestness, that just triggers me when you say that, Well, look into why it triggers you instead of trying to get me to stop using words that I think are important to describe how we have patterns that keep us from really being free. Don't strip us from the ability to talk about this, right? Even if it hurts, because shame protects us, remember? Shame and triggers, they protect us from getting to the buried stuff. That's our first line of defense when we hear something new. It's like, nope, I disagree. This goes against my reality. And then there's the trauma kicking in. I don't want to feel and express what's buried. I don't want to hear what he has to say. I know that because I used to be that. I used to be that defense mechanism against buried emotions. I think that's partly what drove me to be a teacher, because then you don't have to really deal with it, because we don't talk about that here, really. I don't know, maybe some do. But here's how I think about buried emotions real quick, and then we'll talk about those shorts. Buried emotions, that's the contraction. That's your physically separate body, it seems. So if we're not dealing directly with that dense energy, the sense of separation, directly, I don't think we're getting to the root. The stories and the narratives and the identities, those are secondhand. Those are produced by that mechanism that's buried, that produces that self-contraction. Go to the self-contraction skillfully from the beginning. Be earnest. Read the science. Understand, even contextually, even if you're not conscious of it yet, that you create it. Do somatic testing in the beginning of this work to see that you create it, even if it's only an insight and not like a fundamental understanding yet. But as you do the work and you become more conscious and the insights come, it becomes a fundamental understanding, like an insight, that you're creating it. And that's how you can end it. That's why earnestness is important. And so these YouTube shorts is me having fun again, because I could never even communicate this work, and now it's like it's fun to like try to put it in a minute. Is what it is. And also it gives me a chance to let people see more of my personality, because the repression work has brought that out. And that's interesting, to kind of come out of the closet more in terms of my personality, which I have been doing by dancing and doing silly things, but also just, I don't know, I want to have fun. Get ready. We're going to have fun. I am. And the reason is, I've been telling Dan, this is hard work, and I know it, and I don't lie about that. If you want to talk to me about it, I'll tell you about it, because it's the most freeing thing I've ever done, hands down. That's not a marketing ploy. That's just a fact. But it's also a marketing ploy, because you should do it, because if you want to end suffering, it works. But you have to be earnest. Here's the truth about it all for me. I've always had something in me that wants to help people. I just had to extract all that stuff out of it, the repression, and like deeply apologize for it. That's the best I can do. And I think that's the best all us wounded healers can do, who, especially the ones who just are not recognizing they're wounded healers yet. Because this is a trauma bond. This is not, we teachers, we don't have it. We are an unconscious species, and we're just discovering the unconscious, is how I see this. And I think we've been working on the surface level. That's where I was. And we were still suffering. Look at the teachers getting sick, all this. It's a wake-up call. Okay, these shorts, though, are the way that I want to reach more people without making it so heavy. I think that's what I want to say. Because that's a heavy topic. I know that. And it's interesting to try to put something like that in a minute. But watch them, be triggered by them, enjoy them, be bored by them, but check them out. And if you want to get started with this work, you can always go to Killaby.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, take the free repression test there, and we'll show you where to go. And then there's a link to that below too. Thank you.